There is a moment in every failed alliance when the mask comes off, when the careful diplomatic language gets replaced by something rawer and more revealing. And that moment happened yesterday when the President of the United States sat down at his phone, opened Truth Social, and typed in all capital letters, "We don't need anyone's help." 4 words in all caps, written in the early evening after spending 3 weeks asking every major ally America has for exactly that help, after calling 7 countries, after sending formal requests through diplomatic channels, after promising that Europe and Asia would benefit from keeping the Strait of Hormuz open, after warning allies that refusing would have very bad consequences for the future of NATO. After all of that, the president of the most powerful country in the world typed, "We don't need anyone's help," and hit post. And the reason that post is one of the most significant things Trump has done in this entire conflict is not the words themselves. It is what the words reveal about what actually happened. Because you do not post, "We never needed it," in capital letters if you did not need it. You post that when the people you asked said no, and you need to save face. And the entire world, every foreign ministry, every intelligence analyst, every allied government that received and declined Trump's request, read that post and understood exactly what it meant. Now buckle up, because the full story of how the most powerful military alliance in history fractured in real time over a request for minesweepers is something that every American needs to understand. And if you want to follow this story as it develops, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell, because what is happening to America's alliances in the 3rd week of this war is moving faster than any single news cycle can capture. So let us go back to the beginning of this specific chain of events, because the sequence matters, and it tells you something important about how this administration thinks about the countries it calls partners. When Iran began mining the Strait of Hormuz in early March, the immediate strategic problem for the United States was not the mines themselves. It was that America had decommissioned all 4 of its Avenger-class minesweeper vessels in September 2025. Meaning the U.S. Navy had no dedicated mine countermeasure ships in the region at the moment they were most needed, and the littoral combat ships that were supposed to replace them have been described by multiple Navy officials as not yet ready for that mission. The solution Trump's team landed on was straightforward in theory. Ask allied navies that still operate minesweepers to come to the strait and help clear it, frame it as a collective action in defense of global commerce, and use the language of alliance responsibility to make it politically difficult for any country to say no. The countries asked were France, the United Kingdom, Italy, Germany, Greece, Norway, Japan, Australia, and South Korea, some of the closest and most militarily capable allies the United States has, countries that have sent troops to Afghanistan and Iraq, that have participated in American-led operations for 8 decades, that have built their entire defense architecture around partnership with Washington. And here, one by one, is what each of them said, because the specificity of these rejections is the real story, and every word of every response was carefully chosen to deliver a message. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius did not hedge. He did not offer to review the request or consult Parliament or consider the matter in good conscience. He said, "This is not our war. We did not start it. The Americans chose this path together with the Israelis, and Germany will not send ships to a war zone it had no voice in creating." And the phrase "the Americans chose this path" is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, because it is Germany, America's most important European ally, saying directly that this war is not a collective decision of the alliance, but a unilateral American action with collective consequences. France's refusal came half an hour before Trump posted his Truth Social rant, according to reporting by the French news agency. And President Macron said France is working on an international escort mission, but only when circumstances permit, meaning after the fighting has stopped, meaning not now, which is a diplomatic way of saying the answer is no, and we are not going to say yes until the conditions that make yes possible exist. Conditions that the current military situation has not produced. Britain's Keir Starmer, who has been more supportive of the American position than any other European leader, said the strait must be reopened, but that doing so is not a simple task, and that Britain will not be drawn into the wider war, a formulation that preserves the relationship without committing a single ship, and that reflects the reality that British public opinion is overwhelmingly against involvement in a conflict the government was not consulted about before it started. Japan's prime minister said Japan has made no decisions whatsoever about dispatching escort ships, and that existing laws strictly limit overseas military deployments, a legal argument that is technically true and also conveniently available whenever Japan wants to decline an American request. It finds politically uncomfortable. South Korea said it would closely coordinate and carefully review the situation, which is the diplomatic equivalent of a text message that says, "I'll get back to you," and that everyone receiving it understands means no. And China, which was not formally a NATO partner, but whose cooperation Trump publicly requested on multiple occasions, including a threat to cancel the upcoming Beijing summit if Beijing did not help, simply did not respond to the specific request, instead calling on all parties to cease military operations, a position that amounts to telling Trump his war is the problem and China is not going to help manage the consequences of it. Drop a comment below right now and tell me which country's refusal you think surprised Trump the most, because I want to know what you think about the state of the alliance right now, and I will tell you which refusal I think actually hurt the most strategically. Now, here's what the post actually reveals when you read the full text of what Trump wrote, because the language tells you everything about the emotional state of the person who wrote it and the strategic situation he was trying to escape from. He wrote, "Most of our NATO allies have informed the United States that they do not want to participate in our military operation against Iran's terrorist regime in the Middle East, despite the fact that almost every country strongly agreed with what we were doing." And he called NATO a one-way street where the United States spends hundreds of billions to protect its allies, but receives nothing in return in difficult times. And then he wrote, "Due to the fact that we have achieved such military success, we no longer need or do not want the help of NATO countries. We never needed it." The same goes for Japan, Australia, or South Korea. In fact, speaking as the President of the United States of America, by far the most powerful country in the world, we don't need anyone's help. Read that sequence carefully because it tells the story of a man who started a war expecting his allies to follow, discovered they would not, tried to pressure them publicly and privately for 3 weeks, received formal rejections from every country he asked, and then reframed the entire situation as a choice he made rather than a rejection he received. "We never needed it" is the most revealing phrase in the entire post because it directly contradicts the public record of the previous 3 weeks, during which Trump repeatedly and explicitly said he needed it. He asked for it on Truth Social. He raised it at the White House. He threatened allies with a very bad future for NATO if they did not provide it. And Senator Lindsey Graham called for consequences for the countries that refused. And none of that behavior is consistent with not needing it. Professor Miran Kamrava from Georgetown University in Qatar told reporters after the post went up that America's treatment of NATO has undermined America's standing, and that European NATO members and other U.S. allies do not want to get involved in a war against Iran, specifically because they were not consulted before it started. They were presented with a fait accompli and then asked to send their sailors into harm's way in defense of a decision they had no part in making. Here is where the story connects directly to what is happening in your life right now, because this is not just a story about diplomacy and military requests and Truth Social posts. It is a story about the price of oil and the cost of gasoline and the state of the American economy 20 days into a war that was supposed to be over in days. Brent crude closed above $104 per barrel yesterday, the highest level since July 2022, and that number has risen more than 40% since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. And the reason it has not fallen back is that the strait remains effectively closed. 0 commercial vessels transited the Strait of Hormuz in the 24-hour period ending this morning, according to UK Maritime Trade Operations. And the IEA's emergency release of 412 million barrels, the largest in history, has so far produced only a modest and temporary reduction in prices that analysts say will not hold if the closure continues into April. Trump said on Friday night that Americans are going to see a very big decrease in the prices of gasoline as soon as this is ended. And Energy Secretary Chris Wright said on NBC's Meet the Press that Americans would feel the pressure for a few more weeks. And both of those statements contain the same critical phrase in different forms. As soon as this is ended, a few more weeks formulations that presuppose an end that nobody in the administration can currently specify on what terms or by what date. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, issued a statement this week that the closure of the strait is not a temporary measure, but a strategic tool, that it will remain in effect as long as American and Israeli operations continue inside Iranian territory, and that any country that sends warships to the strait in support of the American operation will be considered a belligerent in the conflict, which is the statement that is doing more than anything else to keep allied navies at home, because no European or Asian government wants its sailors to become targets in a war their parliament did not authorize. And here is the most extraordinary fact of this entire situation, the one that Senator Adam Schiff described as a matter of fact and that no one in the administration has adequately addressed. Russia is providing Iran with real-time intelligence on the movements of American forces in the region, and Trump's response to that intelligence assistance has been to lift sanctions on Russian oil companies to try to offset rising gas prices at home, meaning that American consumers are simultaneously paying more at the pump because of a war Trump started while Trump is removing the economic pressure on the country that is helping Iran kill American soldiers. Trump said, when asked about it directly, that he thinks Putin might be helping them a little bit. Yeah, and then immediately drew a comparison to American support for Ukraine. And Senator Schiff said after that interview that the equivalence Trump drew between Russian intelligence helping target U.S. troops and American support for a democratic country defending itself against invasion was not a misspeak or a stumble. It was a considered position. And it is a position that every allied government in Europe and Asia noted very carefully when deciding whether to send ships into a conflict being managed by an administration that treats Russian assistance to forces killing American soldiers as roughly equivalent to American assistance to Ukraine. The post that Trump sent at the end of all of this, the "we don't need anyone's help" in capital letters, is not a strategy, and it is not a policy, and it is not a negotiating position. It is the sound a man makes when he is asked for help from everyone he knows, received no from every single one of them, and needs to find a way to make that sound like it was his choice all along. The American service members who died in Iraq and the Persian Gulf in the last 18 days did not have the option of posting that they never needed to be there. The American families paying $4 a gallon for gasoline cannot post that they never needed those prices to come down. And the allied governments that declined Trump's request are not posting anything because they do not need to, because the capital letters said everything that needed to be said about where the alliance stands right now. If this video showed you something about the state of American power in this war that the press conferences and the Truth Social posts are not showing you, share it right now with someone who needs to understand the full picture. Because what happened yesterday in the span of a few hours, France saying no, Trump posting in all caps, allies choosing their own interests over an alliance they were not consulted about, is not a footnote in this story. It is a chapter heading, and the chapter it is opening is one that the architects of the NATO alliance 77 years ago built the whole thing to prevent. We will be right here covering every development as it happens. Stay tuned and stay informed.